All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into something you might not think is that exciting, a beginner English lesson.
Oh,
But stick with us here,
yeah,
because this is going to be a little more fun than memorizing verb conjugations, I promise.
I hope so.
We're going to be looking at a lesson that focuses on classroom objects.
Oh, interesting.
And I know that might sound kind of basic, like, okay, we've all seen a desk before.
Right.
But trust me, there's actually a lot we can unpack here about the building blocks of language learning.
Absolutely. This kind of lesson, focusing on simple, concrete objects, it's often how we start as language learners.
Yeah, it's like when we're kids, where we point at things and we're like, what's that? What's that?
Exactly. It taps into that innate curiosity we all have about the world around us.
And this particular lesson, it doesn't just throw a list of words at you, it actually tries to make it fun.
Yeah, I noticed that. They use a lot of interactive activities, like repetition drills and guessing games.
Right. And those aren't just there to keep students entertained.
Right.
There's actually a lot of learning science behind them.
Definitely. Repetition, especially when it's spaced out over time, is one of the most effective ways to learn new information.
It's like, doing those flashcards over and over again.
Exactly. Or think of it like practicing a musical instrument.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
You have to repeat those scales and exercises to build up that muscle memory.
And it's the same with language. You have to
Yeah.
practice those words and phrases over and over again until they become second nature.
Exactly. And the guessing games, those are particularly clever. They force the learner to actively recall the information.
Instead of just passively reading it.
Right. And that active recall process, it actually strengthens the neural connections in the brain, making it more likely that you'll remember the information long term.
It's like if you're just looking at a map, you might get a general sense of where things are.
Right.
But if you have to actually navigate the terrain yourself, you're going to remember that route a lot better.
Precisely. And this lesson does a great job of creating that kind of immersive, active learning experience.
And I noticed they use a lot of visuals too, right? Like pictures, the classroom objects, and diagrams.
Yes, that multisensory approach is so important. When you see the object, hear the word, maybe even touch or interact with it.
Like you're engaging all of your senses.
Exactly. It creates a much richer learning experience, and again, it makes it more likely that you'll retain that information.
It's like, how some people say they're visual learners or auditory learners? This lesson kind of caters to everyone.
Yeah, by incorporating those different modalities, it's tapping into different learning styles and making the material accessible to a wider range of students.
So we've got the vocab, the grammar, the interactive drills.
Yeah.
What else is in this magical little lesson?
Well, no language lesson would be complete without some actual conversation practice.
Ooh, this is where it gets really interesting, right?
Exactly. And this lesson actually includes a simple dialogue that takes place in a classroom setting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
It involves two students, Sharo and Mona, and they need to borrow some supplies from each other.
Oh, I love a good school supply drop.
Right. It's a scenario that every student can relate to.
So how does this dialogue unfold?
And it's not just about the words themselves.
Yeah.
It's about the whole flow of the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
They use, excuse me, could I, please, thank you.
Uh-huh.
All those little polite phrases that we use.
They're so important, right?
Yeah, those are the social glue.
The social glue. I love that.
Yeah.
That helps us,
Yeah, it helps us navigate those
Yeah.
social interactions.
And it's stuff you don't always get from a textbook,
Exactly.
Those unspoken rules of communication.
Right, and it's great that they're teaching it through this relatable scenario.
Yeah, it's something
In the classroom.
Yeah, they're in the classroom. They're talking about things they use every day.
Exactly, so it makes it feel more natural for them,
Totally.
It's one thing to memorize a phrase.
Right.
But it's another thing to actually see it used in a real conversation.
Exactly. Then they can start using it themselves,
Yeah.
It gives them that confidence.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of putting this knowledge into practice, I noticed that this lesson has some homework suggestions.
Yeah.
And one of them, and this is brilliant, is to draw a picture of your study space
Oh, wow.
and label everything in English.
That's awesome.
I know. Isn't that a great idea?
That's really cool, yeah.
So you're taking all those words, desk, chair, book, window,
Mm-hmm.
and you're actually applying them to
Yeah.
your own life.
To your own little world.
Yeah, you're creating your own little English world.
I love that.
I know. It's so cool, right?
Yeah, it's really neat.
And it's a world that can expand, right? So you start with your study space,
Yeah.
and then maybe you move on to other rooms in the house, and then the neighborhood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's like those video games where you unlock new levels as you go.
Ooh, that's a great analogy.
I know, right?
It really is like that. Like you start with the basics,
Yeah.
you master those, and then you kind of level up.
Yeah, you level up your vocabulary, you level up your grammar.
And as you do that, you unlock new possibilities.
Totally. Okay, so now I'm curious.
Hmm.
From your perspective as the expert here,
Oh, okay.
are there any downsides to this approach? Like this very visual object-focused approach?
That's a really good question.
Because eventually you have to move beyond concrete things,
I
right?
do, yeah.
How do you teach someone democracy using a picture?
Right.
Yeah,
It's much harder.
right.
Yeah, those abstract concepts,
Yeah.
those are a whole other challenge.
Yeah, those are tougher.
They require a different kind of teaching, I think.
Right, more metaphors and storytelling.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's like you need this solid scaffolding
Yeah.
of basic vocabulary and grammar,
Right.
but then you can build these amazing, like, complex cathedrals of thought.
That's a beautiful way to put it, yeah.
I know, right? I'm feeling very poetic today.
You are.
So this beginner lesson, it's like giving learners the tools to start laying those first bricks,
Absolutely.
and then they can build from there.
Exactly, and that's where the real fun begins, I think.
It's true. It's like once you have those basics,
Yeah.
the world of language just opens up to you.
It does, it really does.
You can tell stories, you can debate, you can express yourself in all these amazing ways.
It's really powerful.
This deep dive has been a good reminder of that.
Yeah, it has. It's been great.
That learning a language isn't just about memorizing rules.
Right.
It's about seeing the world in a whole new way.
It's about connecting with other people, with other cultures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, before we wrap up this exploration
Yeah.
of this beginner English lesson,
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question,
Okay.
and our listeners too.
Okay, I like it.
What do you think is the most important takeaway here?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Like, what's the key principle that we can apply to any kind of learning, not just language?
That we can take with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a tough one.
It's making me think.
Yeah, me too.
I think for me, what really stands out is, that whole idea of starting with a solid foundation.
Yeah.
Like this lesson does with the classroom objects.
Right.
You can't build a skyscraper without a strong base.
Exactly. You need those building blocks.
And it's the same with any skill, right? You got to master the fundamentals before you can move on to the more complex stuff.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things this lesson does so well. It's
Yeah.
not just teaching vocabulary. It's teaching those foundational learning skills.
Like how to learn.
Exactly. And that's something you could apply to anything you want to learn.
It's so true. It makes you realize that, we should never underestimate the power of those early learning experiences.
Yeah, those first steps, those aha moments.
It's like when you were a kid and you learned a new word or you figured out how something worked.
Yeah, it was so exciting.
You were like, whoa, I can do this.
Yeah, I remember that feeling.
But somewhere along the way, for a lot of us,
Yeah.
that excitement kind of fades.
It does. We get bogged down in the detail.
Yeah, or we're afraid to make mistakes.
Right. We don't want to look silly.
But this lesson reminds us that learning should be fun.
It should be. It's about exploring, discovering.
Exactly. And that's something we can bring to any area of our lives, right?
Absolutely.
Whether we're learning a new language or a new hobby, or even just trying to understand a different point of view.
Yeah, that beginner's mind, that openness to new experiences.
It's so important.
It really is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the surprisingly insightful world of a beginner English lesson,
Love that.
what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away?
I would say it's never too late to be a beginner.
Ooh, I like that.
Embrace that curiosity, that willingness to learn, and never stop exploring.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you all.
We hope you've enjoyed exploring the world of language learning with us.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
And until next time, happy learning.
Happy learning.